Test review for Module 1, Writing and Solving Equations. Question 1. Which equation represents this sentence? 7 times the product of a number x and a number y is equal to 50. So, key word right here, product. Product means multiplication. What am I multiplying? A number x and a number y. So I should see in the problem x times y. So I know it can't be A because they're adding. It can't be C because they're adding x and y. And it can't be D because they're also adding x and y. So the answer has to be 7 times x times y equals 50. Question 2. Write a sentence for this equation. Now there's more than one way of writing this, so I'm just going to write it the easiest and quickest way. And the easiest and quickest way is just to write it the way you say it. So I would say 3 plus 4 times n equals 2 times n. So that would be the quickest and easiest way to write that as a sentence. Question 3. You can approximate the distance to a lightning strike by counting the seconds between the flash of lightning and the sound of thunder. This table shows a relationship between time and distance. So you can see the table below. The question is, the equation t equals 8d shows the relationship between the time t in seconds and the distance d in miles. So we need to solve the equation for d. So we're going to start with t equaling 8d. Now to get d by itself, I do the opposite, which it means I'm going to divide by 8. 8d divided by 8 is 1d. And whatever I do to one side, I do on the other. So that means d is going to equal t divided by 8. Question 4. Solve this equation for p. So for solving for p, I go to the side where the p is, and I get everything away from there. So I can't touch the 7 until the last step. So the opposite of subtracting 4 is adding 4. So that's going to give us 35 equaling 7p. The opposite of adding, multiplying by 7 is dividing by 7. That means p is going to equal 5. Question 5. The hottest temperature recorded in Vero Beach, Florida was 96 degrees Fahrenheit. This was 16 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than 4 times the coldest temperature recorded in Vero Beach. Which equation can be used to find the coldest temperature recorded in Vero Beach? And we're just going to erase this last part because that's the repeat of that question. So it says this was 16 degrees warmer. Warmer temperatures are higher up, higher numbers. So that means we have to increase the temperature from the cold. So that means it's going to be a plus. So anything with a minus sign, I can cancel off. And it's 4 times the coldest temperature. And the coldest temperature is labeled with a capital T. So I need to look for one that says 4 times T. Well, that eliminates D. That eliminates A. So the final answer has to be letter B as my equation. And then going back to what I had here, what is the coldest temperature? We don't actually have to find it because it's already in here. The coldest temperature was 20. Because if you put 20 in for T, 4 times 20 is 80. 80 plus 16 is 96. Now moving on to question 6. Solve 12 plus ax divided by 5 equaling 15 for x. Assume that a cannot equal 0. Well, you can assume that a can't equal 0 only if a is in the denominator of your answer. So that is a clue that we need to make sure that a is in the denominator of our answer. So if I take my equation right now of 12 plus ax divided by 5 equaling 15. Now, when I have a fraction on one side and I want to get rid of the fraction, you always multiply by the denominator. So that means the denominator is 5, so I multiply the top by 5. Now, if I were to multiply it, I don't want to distribute it because I can cancel out or divide out the 5 in the numerator and the denominator, and that becomes 1. And all you have left is the numerator, which would be 12 plus ax. But since I multiply by 5 on the left side, to keep it still equal, I have to multiply by 5 on the right side. And 15 times 5 would give us 75. Now we're still trying to solve for x, so I have to find where our x is now and get everything away from there. So to do that, the opposite of adding 12 is subtracting 12. So I'm going to subtract 12 on both sides, and I'm left with ax equaling 63. And to get the x by itself, I divide everything by a, and there's a on our denominator, so x would equal 63 divided by a. Question 7. A car leaves Seattle traveling at a speed of 45 miles per hour. 2 hours later, a second car leaves Seattle traveling at a speed of 55 miles per hour. The car's distances from Seattle at time t hours are shown in the table. After how much time t will the two cars be the same distance from Seattle? So car A's equation is 45t and car B is 55 times t minus 2. We want to make the distance the same. Now to keep in mind, they're basing this off of rate times time equals distance, that formula. They gave us the rate, how fast they're going, and the time. So if car A is rate times time equals distance, or 45t, this has to equal the distance of car B, which would be 55, the rate, times their time, which was t minus 2. So now we get rid of our parentheses by distributing. So that's going to give us 55t minus 55 times 2 is 110. The left-hand side stays the same as 45t. We need to get the t's to one side, so I'm going to subtract 55t on both sides. That gives us a negative 10t equals a negative 110. And our final step is divide by negative 10 on both sides, and the time would be 11 hours. Question 8. Solve 3x minus 2.6 equals 10. So we're going to solve for x. So the opposite of subtracting 2.6 is adding 2.6. That gives us 3x equaling 12.6. The opposite of multiplying by 3 is dividing by 3, so we can get our x by itself. And whatever you do on one side, you do on the other, and that will give us 4.2. Question 9. Solve this one. So to get rid of the parentheses, we're going to distribute, and that gives us 4x. 4 times 8 is a positive 32 equals, this side stays the same as 3x minus 4. Okay, we need to get our x's to one side. It doesn't matter which side. I'm just going to put it to the left. So the opposite of adding 3x is subtracting 3x. That gives us x plus 32 equals a negative 4. Final step to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 32. I'm left with x equaling a negative 36. Question 10. Here I have an absolute value equation. So the first step in solving absolute value equations is to get the absolute value by itself. Right now they're multiplying the absolute value by 3. So to get rid of that 3, I'm going to do the opposite, which means I'm going to divide by 3. That gives me 1, or 1 times the absolute value. The absolute value would be y plus 4 equals, since I divide by 3 on the left, I divide by 3 on the right, and that's going to give us 8. Once the absolute value is by itself, you can now write your two equations. So case 1, you take the expression in the absolute value, so y plus 4, and set it equal to the positive answer they have, which is 8. Case 2, you take that same expression, y plus 4, but this time you make it equal to the negative form of the answer, which would be a negative 8. Because remember, absolute value is the distance from 0 in both directions, to the right of 0 and to the left of 0. Now we just solve for y, so I'm going to subtract 4, and that gives us y equaling a positive 4. And on this side, I do the same thing. I subtract 4, and y is going to equal a negative 12. Now, it doesn't say here to graph it, but let's just graph this so we can identify where our answers would be on a number line. So I'm going to count by 4s. So this would be negative 12, negative 8, negative 4, 0, and 4. Now you can number them any way you want to, as long as the intervals are the same. So then I just put a point at negative 12 and a point at positive 4. Question 11. Describe each equation with the following. So these are your choices. You can either use identity, which means they are the same on both sides, or the same equation. One solution, which means you know exactly what the variable equals. Or no solution, which means when you simplify it, you have a number equaling a different number, which can never happen. So the two numbers are different. They cannot equal each other. So for here, I want to get rid of the parentheses by distributing. So that's going to give me 4t plus 8 equaling, here there's no multiplication. I'm just going to have 4t, and 2 plus 9 is 11. Now if I were to get the t's to one side, so if I would subtract 4t, you'll notice that the t's cancel each other off and you're left with 8 equaling 11. 8 never equals 11, so this is an example of no solution. Now anytime you have the number and the letter the same on both sides, that's a clear sign that it's going to either be identity or no solution. You'll know if it's a no solution because the other number that doesn't have the variable, they're going to be different. So such as 8 and 11. They're not the same, so it would be no solution there. Letter B, 2 minus m equals m minus 2. Now these are not the same because one of them has a positive 2, the other one has a minus 2. One has a minus m and the other one has a positive m. So those are not the same, so it's not identity. So let's get the m's to one side. So if I add m to both sides, we now have 2 equaling 2m plus 2. Now to get our m's by itself, I'm going to subtract 2. Actually, this is a minus 2 here. So I got to add 2 to both sides. That gives me 4 equaling 2m. Get m by itself by dividing by 2, and that tells me m is going to equal 2. That means we have one solution. We know what that variable equals, so one solution. And the last one, get rid of our parentheses here by distributing, and we have 6x plus 7 equals 6x plus 42, because 6 times 7 is 42. Now you notice 6x and 6x. So we know that it's going to either be no solution or identity. But I have a 7 here and a 42 here. They're not the same. So that's a clear sign that this is no solution. Question 12. Which could be an equation for the graph shown? So this is an absolute value equation. So here they tell me my solutions. So I'm going to start with bars. I'm going to use my variable, and I would always start with x minus, because the formula for writing the equation, it's going to be x minus the midpoint. And the midpoint, so let me put MD or MP for midpoint, is going to equal the distance from the center to the outer edge. So how far apart is this point from this point? Well, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 steps away. So if they're 4 steps away, the halfway point is half of 4. Half of 4 is 2. So if I go back 2 steps in from either end, it doesn't matter which end. So if I start here and go 2 steps in, that goes to here. This is the midpoint. So that means I'm going to have x minus, and this is a -1. So I have a -1 here in the absolute value, equals, how far away is it from the midpoint to the outer edge? It is 2 steps. So if I simplify this, this would be the absolute value of x, not minus a -1, but plus 1, equals 2, which leaves us with choice B. Question 13. For a show during the halftime break of a football game, a stage will be set up on the field. The center of the stage is on the 50-yard line. The distance from the center to the outer edges is 12 yards. Write an absolute value equation to represent this problem. So this is an absolute value, so it's very similar to what we just did on in question 12. So we know the distance from the center to the outer is going to be 12. So we're going to have x minus, the center stage is at the 50-yard line, so we're going to see where the edge of the stage is to the 50-yard line. That's got to be within 12. So it's going to be x minus 50 equals the 12. Question 14. Here I have proportions. Anytime you have proportions, you can always use cross multiplication. So I'm going to cross multiply. So I'm going to have 3 times x plus 12 equals the cross products the other direction, 15 times 5. So I distribute the 3, that gives us 3x. 3 times 12 is a positive 36, equals 15 times 5 is 75. We're solving for x, so I don't want this 36 here, so I'm going to do the opposite. So I'm going to subtract 36. That gives us 3x equaling, here I need to borrow, 15 minus 6 is 9, 6 minus 3 is 3, so I have 3x equaling 39. The opposite of multiplying by 3 is dividing by 3, so I'm going to do that on both sides, and x will equal 13. Question 15, I also have proportions here. going to do the same thing with cross products. So negative 18 times 2 is going to equal 6 times x. Negative 18 times 2 is negative 36 equals 6x. And to get x by itself, I'm going to divide by 6 on both sides, and x is going to equal a negative 6. And our last questions. Solve x plus 10 divided by 7 equals 6y for x. Now, there's two ways you could do this one. Since we've been just doing sum with proportions, let's just make this as a proportion. So all I have to do is just put a 1 underneath the 6y. And now I can use cross products. So I'm going to have x plus 10 times 1. And that's going to equal 7 times 6y. And when I simplify that, 1 times x plus 10 is just x plus 10 equals 7 times 6 is 42 with the y. And now we're supposed to solve for x. So to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 10. When I do that, x is going to equal 42y minus 10. I cannot combine the 42 and 10 because the 10 does not have a y, so they're not like terms. And our very last question. According to a survey, 11.5% of men over the age of 30 in Jonesville worked 2 or more jobs. The survey had a margin of error of positive or negative 2.4%. Of the estimated 30,000 men over the age of 30 in Jonesville, how many would you expect to work 2 or more jobs? So I'm going to take the percentage and the margin of error. And we have 11.5%. When it says plus or minus 2.4%, that means I could go 2.4% lower than that, which will give us 9.1. Or I can go 2.4% above that. So 11.5 plus 2.4 is going to give us 13.9. Now to solve this, we have to find what is 9.1% of 30,000. So I'm going to have 30,000. You're going to multiply that by 9.1%. But the 9.1% I'm going to be changing to a decimal, which will be 0.091. And we're going to use our calculator to figure that out. So we'll grab our calculator, and we're going to do 30,000. We're going to multiply that by 0.091. That gives us 2,730. So that's the lowest or the fewest amount of men in Jonesville who have 2 or more jobs. Next, we're going to do on the high side. So you're going to take 30,000. We're going to multiply that by 0.139. Grab our calculator again. We have 30,000 times 0.139. That equals 4,170. So on the high side, you could have 4,170 men who have 2 or more jobs. So that is a quick review on writing and solving not only regular equations, but absolute value equations.